Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad to have you here today. Welcome to the Friday Forum. My name is Cindy McDonald, and I'm an educator, an entrepreneur, a speaker, and a producer. And I love bringing information to you about topics you care about in education and in business. So I'm very honored and have the pleasure of interviewing subject matter experts from across the world on all these different topics. And today I'm so excited to bring back a former speaker who is bringing in a colleague to talk to you about a business aspect of blogging. So before we get started, as you log in, please put your name and your location into the chat. And also just put down, do you blog? Yes or no. So you can just put down a yes or no. And we're glad to have you joining us on this Friday morning. So welcome to the Friday Forum. Put your name in, and that way you'll get introduced to my guests, Luke and Mark. And also we have Carmen helping us manage your questions, the chats, links, all of that wonderful aspects of the show of the Friday Forum. So I can see we've already got people coming from Texas and California. And as you log in, remember, put down, do you blog? Ruchi blogs. I see lots of yeses, not currently. So that gives us a perspective in terms of our topic for today. So welcome, Luke. Welcome, Mark. I'm glad
Oh,
to
thank
have
you.
you here today and glad to talk about this topic of blogging. Let me introduce both of you so people get a sense of who you are and what your expertise in this is. Mark Gray is the founder and director of Education for Odyssey College Prep. He uses advanced aptitude testing to simplify the college process or the college admissions process for students and parents. I like the emphasis on the simplify. Sometimes that's really a hard thing to do. He also guides students to create targeted passion projects to differentiate their college applications. So, sounds like a lot of good work, Mark, that you're doing. And Luke, and you're going to have to tell me how to say your last name because I am not Italian.
Siciliano.
Siciliano, thank
Just
you.
rolls off the tongue.
It does.
Oh, yeah, totally. He's a web engineer and co founder of Modern Website Design. He's been recognized as a top contributor to the freecodecamp.org and has had multiple online brands acquired due to their high traffic. In addition to development services, Luke regularly provides assistance to businesses who are hoping to grow their online presence. So I'm very glad to have both of you here today
Oh, thank
and
you.
appreciate your time and energy to talk about one of those topics. There's so many topics we could talk about, but to talk about blogging. And Mark, I know you've had some experience with putting a blog on your website. So we'll be interested in hearing what that looks like and what that feels like. So as you're looking at the chats, what are you noticing here? Either one of you, what are you noticing?
Lots of yes, but not as often as I'd like. Inconsistent. People want to blog, but maybe they're not the best at keeping a schedule.
Yeah, that's the thing that just kind of stand in one way or another. Yeah, that keeps popping up to me. Yeah.
I could put that in there as well sometimes. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I think we all do. And so those are some of the challenges that come along with blogging and things that we recognize as entrepreneurs, but understanding a little bit more about how consistency and just how blogging works is kind of what brought us here. So let's elaborate. Let's talk about how a blog contributes to a business growth. Why is it important to have a blog?
Okay. I mean, honestly, from a pure like business standpoint, the reason why it's really important to have a blog is I mean, the short and simple answer is because you make more money. But it's it's really the best way to grow a business in terms of different avenues people look at. People will think in terms of should I go to networking events? Should I go like in your area, people might think should I go to networking events? Should I go around and introduce myself to high school counselors? Should I do social media advertising? Should I do pay-per-click advertising? Et cetera, et cetera. And just on a pure return on investment thing, uh, blogging correctly, I gotta stress the correctly part, but as a pure return on investment, whether you're investing time or money, having a blog's just, gonna give you the best ROI for your business.
And Luke said best, right? I didn't hear you. Like you didn't
Yeah,
say a good
correct.
way. You said the
Yeah,
best way.
yeah, no, it's the best ROI in the sense that a lot of times I'll talk to people and they'll think, I'm just using something as an example. Well, I run social media ads and I'm making money off of that. I'm not saying you can't make money off of other things. I'm just saying,
Mhm.
some things have a better return on investment than another. And if I have my choice of going to two jobs, one pays $10 an hour and one pays $20 an hour, I mean, call me crazy, but I'm going to go to the one that pays $20 an hour. So, I mean, if you've got a choice of activities to be engaging in and one's got the best ROI out of all of them, that's the one you should be putting your efforts into.
And that is measured by acquire in our industry. I mean, it all depends on the industry and what your purpose for the blog is. But in our industry, how would you measure at that? Mark, what from your experience, what did that translate to for you?
Well, with me, it's really easy. I mean, how many calls am I getting? Right? I mean, like also before before Luke came around, um, I didn't get any calls from our website, right? It was all word of mouth, which is great, right? Like I'm happy for happy clients to refer their friends and whatnot to me. But I'm really dependent on their social circles, right? Whereas, once I started blogging regularly and blogging correctly, calls started coming in, and it's really easy to, measure your success that way. And also, I see in the chat that, some people may have like a hard time continuing a blogging schedule. I get that. It's really hard because I wrote a few blogs and I get not wanting to continue if you don't see like a return on the time you're putting in. And so, blogging correctly, using data, making sure you're writing about the right stuff, it was easy to continue doing it because I started seeing success and getting calls and getting new clients.
Great, great.
And yeah, as a quick follow-up to that too, in terms of like measuring ROI, and again, I'm talking purely just in a dollars and cents standpoint, but measuring ROI is something I get asked about a lot. And just as an example, I mean, there's a lot of examples like this, um, but this is one I'm using that I tend to use a lot. There's a customer I'm thinking of, he's in a different field, but there's a customer I'm thinking of that it's been about 10 years now since there's a particular article he put on his website. In the 10 or so years since that article's been on his website, it's been clicked on in organic search, probably somewhere in the area of 12,000 times. So, meaning people went to the Google machine, typed in whatever they typed in, and landed on this website or this article. Now, in his area of business, in his particular geography, if he was doing the Google ads, if he was doing pay per click, he'd be spending about $15 every time somebody clicked through to his website. So those 12,000 clicks he's gotten over, and that article is getting just as much traffic today as he did the day he wrote it. Um, so those 12,000 clicks at $15 a click is the equivalent of $180,000 worth of paid advertising over the course of 10 years. Um, he spent like 2.5 hours writing that article. So he got paid $180,000 for 2.5 hours of his time.
Wow.
So now that's a home run. They're not all that's going to be the rare example, but that's the example I use to show well, gee, do I want to do ads or do I want to maintain a blog? I mean, when people think, well, how do you measure the ROI on a blog? I mean, to me, the simplest, straightforward way to do it is if you were paying to acquire that much traffic, how much would it cost you? Right. And then say, okay, you know, if it, how much would it cost me? That's how much I got paid for this article.
Mm.
End of discussion. And it's almost always, oh wow, yeah, blogging is a lot more cost effective than paying for ads. So
What about from social media? How does it compare to posting social media
Here we
using?
go.
yeah, yeah. So that that dive on from an ROI standpoint, that dives into a couple of things. What I was just saying in terms of ads, pay per click. I'm answering that a little indirectly. Comparing pay per click traffic and saying pay per click traffic, which is essentially traffic from a search engine, which is the example I just gave. That's an apples to apples comparison because somebody's paying for an ad is that means they're looking on Google or Bing, and then someone clicking on that article in search means they're finding it through Google or Bing. So it's a similar thing. Um, your big issue with social media is, and I do not care what industry somebody is in. Because I see a lot of data from a lot of different websites from a lot of different industries across the board. This never fails. Who find a website through social media don't engage with it. Like if you were to look at the data of, hey, I landed on this blog through, or I landed on this website through doing a search and landing on the blog, because the blog's relevant to what I'm looking for. The amount of time they spend on a page and the extent to which they engage on a site dwarfs the amount of time and engagement you get from social media, which only makes sense, right? Because if I go to if you go to Google and you do a search and you land on a website, you are specifically looking for something and you want information about it, right? If you're, just scrolling through an Instagram feed or scrolling through a Facebook feed and you go, oh, that looks interesting, and you click on it, you weren't on Facebook looking for that specific thing. You were, you know, that wasn't your purpose in being there. So by definition, you're not going to engage with it, as much just because that's not what you were in the process of doing when you found the article.
Mhm.
So
So it's a
the
much
re
more passive experience on social media versus you're hunting for something when you're
Yeah,
Google.
correct. Yeah, you're looking at something. That's a good way of putting it. You're looking at something for looking at something because you found it kind of passively instead of hunting for it. And to me, that reduced engagement. Yeah, you might get traffic to your site through social media, but like Mark was just saying, hey, I get this traffic and it turns into phone calls, it turns into inquiries. You're not going to, you're not going to get the same level of that through social media. It's just not going to happen. And I don't care what industry somebody is in. We see that 100% of the time across the board,
Well,
which is one of the reasons why. I mean, this is a side note. I don't want to go there. It's one of the reasons why I tell I should say of the reasons why I tell people the amount of time that should be spent on social media is like zero. But you know, that's that's a separate rant.
Well, I think most educational consultants listening here would probably sigh in relief
Mhm.
to, that Luke is giving them permission to not spend any time on social media.
Well, I think Mark would attest to this. Like, how much has your business grown versus and how much time have you spent on social media in that time, right?
Yeah, before I
Started
started
blogging.
blogging, we had several TikTok accounts, or not accounts, but we had lots of TikTok videos, and one of them we got somewhere around 14,000 views on, and which is fun, right? If it was a vanity project, right? Like where I just wanted to like see how many people could see a funny video that we made, but it resulted in zero conversions. Whereas blogging, I mean, I don't have to go into that. It's been way more successful. So yeah, for sure.
Well, let's take you back. Let's have you explain a little bit, Mark, about what your journey has been from blogging, like how you started. And I know we covered that in part one, but just give us a little bit of summary because not everybody was in that session. So to give it a context.
Sure. So one, I have a writing degree, but so like some people will say, oh, well, you have a writing degree, like blogging's easier for you. That's not true. And first off, most IECs, or anyone who works in education, we help kids become better writers, right? So I feel like everyone has the literary faculty they need to blog. But with me, it was I thought that I had to know a bunch about coding, and also once I started researching about blogging, all my social media algorithms were pointing me to these like SEO experts that were like, do this on all your blogs. And I got very overwhelmed and thought I had to do all these different things. But then a friend of mine pointed me to Luke, and Luke was like, no, don't stop reading about blogging and just blog, right? Like blog about what the data tells you to blog about, and keep blogging, And then like one time I spent like an hour on a graphic on the blog, and Luke told me that's an hour you could have spent blogging. Like don't like don't worry about, So essentially it's just I started writing and blogging and I got better at it. And now it's only been 3 years. I've been doing it for 3 years now. And it's by far it's how I get the majority of my clients.
Oh. So, how do you figure out what topics to blog about?
Are
Uh
you asking? Okay, yeah, go ahead.
which one?
I'm
Which one do
asking
you
Mark, and then you're going to bump it over to Luke.
Okay. So we talked about this a little bit in the last one, but I exclusively write about what the data tells me to write. And when I say the data, what Google Search Console and Google Analytics tell me to write about. If people are searching for something, I need to write about more about what they're searching for.
Hmm. Hmm. So, how do you find that data out, Luke? Where does that come from?
Um, well, I mean, really, there's two tools, and I don't want to go. I mean, there's a million videos online and tutorials on how to use the two tools. The only two tools I suggest using are Google Analytics and Google Search Console. Google Analytics will basically tell you, here's how much traffic your site got, and these are the pages that people landed on through Google search. And then Google Search Console is a tool, has one of the features of Google Search Console is you can see, you know, if people landed on page X, here are some of the queries they were using to find page X. And you can also see just queries people are doing that page X is relevant to, like in general. And it's really like anything else. Uh, when something's working, do more of it. When something's not working, do less of it. And the biggest mistake people make when they start blogging is, well, the biggest mistake people make with their blog is not having a blog. Then the second biggest mistake they make is saying, I'm going to write about what I want to write about in the way that I want to write about it. In other words, writing about whatever they think is, whenever they will write about whatever they think other people will be interested in, or worse yet, they write about what they think is interesting, right?
Mhm.
Um, Whereas when you go into like Search Console, you'll see people are searching for XYZ. I'm going to write more about XYZ. Hey, I wrote an article on ABC. Not one human has searched for ABC. Therefore, I'm never going to write on ABC again. Okay. And what you'll find is that you get a few articles out there, and like, let's say you get two articles out there, you'll start getting some data points on those of, here are some things people are searching for. So then you write more on those topics. And then it really turns into a spider web where every piece of data causes you to write more on something, but then you get more data as a result of that. So the amount of topics you can see that you have available to you to write about just keeps, like expanding out, and getting wider. Um, I wrote an article once. I mean, just as an example of this, I wrote an article once on cybersecurity in a particular industry because, and this is and keep in mind, like a lot, some of the advice I give with the benefit of hindsight. Um, so
Mhm.
I wrote an article on cybersecurity in a particular industry because I considered it important, and it was really brilliantly well written article, I have to say. And but like, but the number of people who read it literally was essentially zero. Um, so therefore, even though A, I knew it was important, and B, I knew this was an industry where everybody could be hacked in 3 seconds. No one read it, which might be why they can all be hacked in 3 seconds, but no one read it, and so therefore I never wrote on cybersecurity again. For okay, but then there were some other topics I wrote on that that I didn't expect to be essentially hits at the time, and I realized, oh, there's a whole lot of interest in this aspect of this thing I wrote about. Like I might have written an article on 4 topics, and it turned out one aspect of it had a whole lot of interest. So then I wrote a whole lot more on that aspect, and then all those articles started getting a lot of traffic. So in other words, something was working, so I did more of it. Something wasn't working, so I did less of it.
Mhm. So it has a multiplier effect.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and the multiplier effect is twofold, and it gets into why the ROI on a blog is so high. One, it has the multiplier effect that you just mentioned of or like you said, the multiplier effect you're talking about there is, if you follow one data point, next thing you know, you've got two more data points to follow. And then if you follow those two, next thing you know, you've got four more to follow, and et cetera, et cetera. The other big multiplier effect from a blog, and this gets to like the ROI of a blog. Um, I tell people to think of it like this because a blog gives you a compounding effect that no other form of advertising or marketing efforts is going to give you. Okay. Because here's how I ask people to think of it. When's the last time you were doing an internet search and you were reading some article and the article's 2 years old? All the time, right? We always read older stuff on the internet.
Mhm.
When's the last time you looked at a social media post that was more than a week old?
Right. For
Yeah,
sure.
very
Right.
early.
Yeah. And with an ad, a paid ad, for example, every time somebody clicks it, you got to pay for it. And as soon as you stop paying for it, it disappears. Okay. So a blog is something you put it out there once. Like Mark, I'm sure Mark will tell you he's getting calls today for an article he wrote from an article he wrote 2 years ago.
Yep.
Okay. But, but something you put on social media 2 years ago, if you put it on social media 2 years ago, that's 104 weeks. It stopped returning value to you about 103 weeks ago,
Mm.
right? Um,
I'm still waiting
at,
on the first call from those TikToks.
yeah, and like ads, you just have to keep paying for them. So if you put one blog article on your website this month, it's going to keep paying you over time. But then if you put a second article on your website next month, now you've got two articles that are going to keep paying you over time. So you actually get a compounding effect there. Like after a while, you've got 100 articles, which means you've got 100 different articles yielding phone calls. So it's really the only way that I've ever found that you're going to get in any business where you're going to get a compounding effect from your effort, where your efforts don't go away over time, and then you get a
Mhm.
compounding effect from your cumulative efforts.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that's why it's so much more powerful than relying just on social media. It becomes a real brick in your foundation. So,
Mhm.
Carmen, it looks like I have a question, and then I want to talk about some acquisition problems that business owners might not be thinking of. So, go ahead, Carmen.
Sure. So Luke, is this what you're referring to as blogging correctly?
Yeah. So when I say blogging correctly, what I'm referring to, the answer to that question is yes. The two aspects of blogging correctly are A, following the data, which is what we've just been talking about, and and literally people, and it and I mean that in a very strict sense. I mean, every single blog post you're ever going to write, you should have a data point telling you, hey, write on this. Like if you're ever thinking, I think an article on XYZ would be good. Well, put it off to the side, forget about it. Like no, I'm a firm believer no article should be written unless some data point told you to write it, not because you want to write it. And then the second part of blogging correctly is just having a consistent schedule.
Mhm. And when you look at, like, everybody should have access to the Google Analytics
Yeah, it's
dashboard.
free.
And what's the difference between using a free tool versus a paid tool?
Well, Google Analytics is free and Search Console is free. Um,
And those are the
the
only two things that you feel like those will give you the data that you need to
yeah,
be able
yeah,
to correctly.
yeah, those are all I use, and that's what we use at Free Code Camp, and it's one of the top 1,000 trafficked websites in the world. Yeah. Uh, yeah. So it's not free versus paid. It's useful versus non-useful. So Google Search Console that's Google's internal data. Okay, that's Google's data of how many people are searching for something, and they're letting you see that. And there's other things you can get in Google Search Console that you get from other so-called paid services, like you can see who's linking to your website and and stuff like that. The problem with these paid services, there's a gazillion of them out there, and they're all I consider my personal opinion is that they're all utterly worthless. Um, there's a million of them out there. Uh, they're essentially trying to give you the same information that you can get from Google Search Console for free. But then the problem with that is A, they cost money. B, they cost money. But the other problem with them is they're trying to recreate the data through some different tools that I'll spare you. But they don't have it's not like they have access to Google's internal data sets. So they're working off of, by definition, they're working off of, in my opinion, what is inferior data to
Mhm.
try to give you a data package to follow up on. So, I mean, to me, if I can get better data free of charge, that's a whole lot better than paying for inferior data.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah.
Most wouldn't argue.
Go to the
But like
source.
what he's what he's saying though, like if we apply that to like how it would work for an independent educational consultant or anyone working in education. So Luke put a gun to my head basically and said you need to write a really, really, really long article on Cornell, right? And I pride myself as his most obedient client. So I may not be the fastest, but I eventually wrote that article. It was really long and I learned a lot while I did it. Well, now here recently in the industry, a lot of the Ivy Leagues are going back to requiring standardized testing now because I do test prep and because I'm interested in that. The the writer and the educator in me wants to write about that, right? Like I really want to write stuff about that. But if I'm doing it the way Luke's suggesting, my Google Search Console right now is telling me, hey, a lot of people who read that Cornell article that you wrote, a lot of people found it by looking for Cornell's human ecology program,
Really?
right? So, yeah, a lot of people did, right?
And that
So,
would have never occurred to you. I mean, like you wouldn't have
no, no,
I mean, that's like adding apples and kumquats. Like how
right,
how could those
yeah.
two go together? That's
Well,
interesting.
well, in the article that's on how to get into Cornell, we talked about the different colleges and the different programs, right? Well, so the human ecology program is in there. So if I'm clever, right, the next article I write hopefully would be about, Cornell human ecology.
Hmm.
Otherwise, I'm just throwing stuff at the wall and hoping it sticks, which it might, but every time I have not written, with the data, it's like every time. And I mean like when I was when I hadn't even been working with Luke for more than a year, a part of me is just like, well, what if I just write this and what if it does well? I'll show that guy. And it didn't. It didn't. Like I wish it did. I wish I could have called him and been like, well, Luke, I did this and it worked just fine, but
I
sadly
would
it
have
didn't.
said cool if it did. I mean, I
Yeah,
hoped it
yeah.
would have. I mean,
But yeah.
Well, it's interesting. A couple of years ago, I found a book written, and I'll put this in the show notes, but it's They Ask, You Answer. And he was a pool, like he built pools. And he was the very first person to go on writing a blog answers to questions that customers had about building pools and what kind of decking and it just doing that, answering questions and putting it in the blog shot his business up like 1,000-fold. I mean, it made a huge amount of difference. And then he's
Mhm.
gone on and taught people how to use that approach of asking questions, answering questions people might have in your industry. And that's where the Google Analytics and the dashboard come in. So it makes it easy because then you can look and see what the questions are. You're not having to guess off the top of your head what they might be asking. So,
Mhm. Yeah, and to kind of take what I'm just kind of putting together what you just said and what Mark just said. The other thing too is like when somebody does think, hey, I think XYZ will be a good topic, I'm going to write about it. Well, think back to like what you were just saying, you can use those tools to find out what people are asking. And we talked a minute ago about how the more you write, the more data you get, right?
mhm,
So, you write two articles, more articles are going to equal more and more data points. Well, if you think XYZ is going to be an interesting article, but you don't have any data to support it, put the idea off to the side because as your data points get more and more and more and more and bigger and bigger and bigger and wider and wider and wider, if XYZ is such a good topic, it should eventually start showing up in your data points. And if it doesn't, and then when it shows up, it validates this belief you had, and that gives you the green light to go ahead and write on it. And if you never see it show up in there, then it's clear no one's looking for it.
mhm,
If that makes sense.
yeah.
Well, that's how we I wanted to start writing about the Ivy Leagues when I hired Luke, you know. Um but the data wasn't pointing there, right? And so I ended up writing an article on test optional, and that led to another article and so on and so forth. And then it became more prudent for us to write about those topics. So, yeah, anyway.
So have you noticed, Mark, now we're post-COVID, during the time of COVID, there are probably certain topics that were more in demand that people were searching for, especially like test optional, because everybody was going test optional. And now things have shifted post-COVID. And plus, we had the SCOTUS decision last summer about affirmative action. So are you noticing that drive some of the searches, like current topics, or
Yeah,
how much
so
of a factor does that have?
I am probably a bad person to ask that because one thing that one thing that Luke, forgive me if I'm putting words in your mouth, feel free to correct me. I thought about writing stuff on that, and I asked Luke about it in one of our meetings. We meet once a month to go over my data and figure out what I'm going to write. And
You
I
mean
said,
writing
hey,
about SCOTUS? You mean about affirmative action?
right,
Okay.
yeah, and when MIT decided to reinstate their testing requirements, I said, hey, this is big. It's happened. And Luke said, yeah, don't write about it. And I'm like, why? He's like, because no one will talk about it in a few months. Like no
Mhm.
one will be, so
Mhm.
um especially for a small business. I don't know if you're like inside higher ed, or if you're working, like if you're a journalist, right? It may be different, but your content will really do more work for you if it's evergreen, if it's stuff that people will always be searching for. So again, I don't know if I could accurately answer that because I don't write about typically topics that have like a short shelf life. We try to write about stuff that people will always be searching for.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's just kind of what I follow, and it's kind of what I preach to people is ask yourself. I mean, you never know if that matters today is going to matter in 10 years, but you can tend to have a pretty good idea, right? Um, and it's my goal in anything I ever write that if I'm writing this today, is the topic it's speaking to, is the information still going to be useful to somebody essentially forever? and my goal is essentially like forever. Um, which is why like the customer I mentioned a little while ago who's got an article that's 10 years old and it's getting just as much traffic today as it did the day he wrote it. It's just as useful to people as it was, like 10 years ago. Um, and uh, so it's because like Mark just put it in a good way re really think of your blog posts as employees, okay? Because they're working for you, they're bringing you customers. Um, So, and it gets to that compounding effect I talked about where I write one article today, it's going to get a whole bunch of traffic for the next 10 years. I write another article tomorrow. Well, now I've got two articles that are going to bring a whole bunch of traffic for 10 years, which means double the phone calls, right? And there's a compounding effect there. Three articles means triple the four phone calls, four articles means four times the phone calls, et cetera, et cetera. Well, if the first article's only got a shelf life of 6 months before no one's looking for it anymore,
Right.
there's no compounding effect,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? I mean, you're just kind of then you're just chasing your own tail. You're writing the next article to get back the traffic you've that's dropped off because no one cares about the first article, like anymore,
Hmm.
right? Um, uh, so it really is. I just ask myself anytime I write something, it's what I always suggest to people is ask yourself, is this going to be useful for as long as I can foresee? And it's not that an article, like just using the example we were just talking about, it's not like an article about, hey, MIT just made these changes. It's not that people wouldn't care about it today because they would, right? A year from now, who cares? 2 years from now, really, who cares in 2 years? Like nobody,
Right.
right? So, I mean, if I'm gonna hire an employee, I mean, I want them to be, if I hire someone to work for me, my goals well, most people I hire tend to be pretty useless, but it would be something where like, if I were to hire if I were to hire an employee, my goal is not for them to be useless in 6 months,
Right. Right.
right? So my goal is for them to be useful forever and think of your blog posts as employees because they're out there marketing for you.
But part of why we do the blogs and what motivates us as educators and entrepreneurs is to be thought leaders. You learn about thought leaders and how to be a thought leader, and being a thought leader oftentimes is stating an opinion or commenting on current events. And then how does that, the goal of being a thought leader, how does that connect with having something be evergreen?
Uh, so I'll say something. If you feel compelled as a altruistic humanitarian person to weigh in on something, that doesn't have a long shelf life, and correct me if you disagree, Luke, that might be a better topic for your email list, you know?
Yep.
Mm.
Um, but maybe not like a 1,500 word article, right? Like that should be something. So if you want to be a thought leader, then what you say should be relevant, right? And it should be, and if data is telling you that, hey, this is what people are searching for and this is what they want to know, I think it behooves you to care about your audience enough to write about that would be the most useful for them.
Yeah, and what what people are going to find, and this is just in real, in practical everyday life, in terms of like maintain or practical everyday maintaining a blog, I should say. Um, and I've seen this a whole bunch of times where, you know, I'll have a customer that'll say to me, "Oh, hey, XYZ is really important in my industry. I really need to write on it." I'm like, "Oh, no, yeah, don't do it. No, no, And then they'll go, "Oh, no, yeah, I really need to write it." No, 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 don't do it. No, nope, And then a week later they go, "Oh, yeah, hey, I just wrote a 5,000 word article on XYZ." I'm like, "Oh, okay. Yep.
Oh gosh, that's so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah. And then a year later we looked at it and three people have clicked on it.
Mhm.
So again, it gets back to this idea of writing on what you want to write about. You have nothing to suggest, and if Bob writes on whatever Bob wants to write about because he thinks it's really important, there's nothing to suggest people are actually looking for it, right? Um, And so really the only person that's ever going to read that article is Bob, like when he proofreads it. And I don't mean that to sound crude, but it's just something I see a lot where,
Yeah.
yeah, where I see that too much, where people they're really, man, I got to get this information out there. Well, by definition, if no one's reading it but you, it's not out there, right?
So are you then, so Mark, this question is for you. So like you're going onto Google Analytics and how do you find what people are looking for? Like, do you have your own search words to see if that's what people are looking for, or do you have like a filter? How do you figure out what people are looking for?
Um, I can share my screen briefly, but again, like we spoke a bit about this last time, but it's really it's super, so I put in the link of the article that I wrote on Cornell, right?
Mhm.
And I mean, like I'm on queries, human ecology, right? Lots of human ecology. People just keep searching for it. So I wonder what I should write about next time, right? I mean, like it's just
So you're
I'm like,
using one of your successful blogs then to create that multiplier effect. What worked here, therefore I can take that and work it other places.
Hmm.
mhm,
Yeah, and when you write at length, what you'll find with that, the article Mark's talking about is really long, and anything about ecology, I guarantee you, I'd have to look at the article, but I guarantee you anything about ecology, and it is just a very small, like if not even maybe just a sentence, right? It's certainly not a bulky piece of the article. Um, but again, that's just the fact that that happens to be in there, even though it's not the focus of the article at all, it gives you a whole different data point to go off of, right? Um, one of the most successful customers I have, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to share his website with you or anything, but one of the most successful customers I have had a had an article on. I'm going to have to be a little vague with this, so forgive me, but he had an article on topic X and uh, uh, a sentence in one of his, and I do mean a sentence in one of his articles was after about 4 weeks of doing ABC, you should see one, two, three. And we looked at, and when we looked in his and that was just a sentence. It said, after 4 weeks, you should see this out of maybe a 2,500 word article. And when we looked in his search console, we just really consistently saw people, I'm paraphrasing, but what results should I see at 4 weeks? What results should I see at 4 weeks? What results should I see at 4 weeks? And we realized that one sentence was causing that article to be relevant to that query. So then he wrote an entire series of articles essentially saying, here are the results you should see at week one. Here are the results you should see at week two, at week three, at week four, at week five. And that was a 12 article series. And it turned into the 12 most successful articles on a very highly trafficked website. And then those articles started yielding traffic on during week one, you want to do A, B, and C.
Mhm.
Or so then he started writing about doing A, B, and C during week one of this process, if all that makes sense.
Mhm.
And then all those articles took off.
Wow.
Okay. So that's just an example of if you write well, if you write in depth on something, you're a little blurb in it, what might be a sentence, what might be a paragraph, what might be a section of that article is going to give you a whole new set of data points that you didn't know existed.
That's very interesting. Very, very encouraging. I think that's exciting. We have a number of questions that I'm seeing in the chat, and so I want to come to these before we run out of time. But Ruchi's asking, where do you blog? I know I have this. I've had conversations with people, and they're trying to put blogs in LinkedIn and other places. So where do you put the blogs? Where's the most effective place to put it?
Put them where you own it.
Hmm.
Like if you're going to use LinkedIn as your blogging platform, you don't own LinkedIn,
Right.
right?
yeah, if you're gonna
Like,
do that, don't.
yeah, no, like they should be one place. They should be on your website, whether it's a blog, whether, I don't want to get too much into like technical stuff, they should be on a website that is on a domain that you own. In other words, if you want to use a free platform like Blogger or something, knock yourself out, but just make sure that it's not, in other words, make sure it's not, you're not creating content that LinkedIn owns. You're not creating content that
Yes.
uh if you're using Blogger that Google owns through the Blogspot platform. Like own your domain. In other words, the whole point of this is that you own it, not that somebody else owns
And I can't emphasize that enough. I totally second that, having gone through that in a couple of different scenarios. Put it on your own website. And even
it.
if all you have is, and I keep telling people, like when I started my website, I had a picture and a paragraph and then add a blog. You don't have to have a huge website in order to add a blog to it, but have it be your own URL.
Yeah, and for people that aren't real technically literate, I mean, there are like free blogging platforms out there that, just to be frank, if you can't use them, you probably shouldn't be using the computer machine in the first place. And but if you're going to use one of those platforms, there are some that do what I'm about to say and some that don't. Make sure the ones you want to use, make sure they are ones where I can go buy a domain on GoDaddy or whatever, and then that's the domain I'm using for. So here I own the domain, I'm using this blogging platform. Because then if I want to build my own website later and stop using this blogging platform, I can still move the blog posts over and keep the URLs and everything. It doesn't go away. Everything, all my work does, the value of all my work doesn't go away. So make sure it's on something where you are going to own the domain that's pointing to it.
Mhm. Yeah. So the couple of other related questions. One is, and Mark, I see you've been answering this, like length of article. Does it matter? I mean, should they be 300 words, 1,000 words? Does it matter I know last time you talked about headings and the importance of that. So, just even formatting can make a big difference, but is there, in terms of length of blog, is there an optimal?
So I asked Luke this, and his response was, and this is very typical of him, was well, like, how much do you have to say? Right. So like
Yeah.
if I'm writing how to get into Cornell, right? People that are going to be reading that want to know some like they want some meat. They want a strategy, and there's no way I can do that in under if I could do that in under 2,000 words, that would be miraculous, right? Now, most of the articles that I put on my website are around 1,000 words or more, you know. Um, and then something else Luke recommends. By the way, I don't write big, atrociously long articles all the time. Like that was like a something that Luke recommended me to do a couple times, right? So most of my articles are around 1,000 words or more. But one thing Luke said early on was to try to primarily write in a series.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not just going to write a random article. It'll be a series on a certain topic, and I'll have an intro post that's around 500 words or more, and then whatever the first main point would be, 1,000 words or more, second main point, third main point, etc., and then a wrap-up post that kind of summarizes it all, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's I'd say about like, I don't know, 70 to 80, 90. Most of the articles I write are in kind of that format.
Good. Good. All
Did
right,
I
Carmen.
is that is that
Yes.
more or less appropriate, Luke? Did I
Yeah,
butcher
yeah.
anything there? Okay.
No, yeah, yeah. People ask me all the time, how often that's exactly what I say. People go, how often do I blog? And I just go, how often do you have something to say? Right? And some people, there is no rule like, oh, I must blog like 3 times a week. I worked with one business owner one time and he felt like he had to post something 3 times every week. And then next thing you know, he was like writing movie reviews. Yeah, and stuff like, which obviously had nothing to do with his business. So yeah, it really is just in terms of frequency, it's how often do you have something to say, which if you're following the data should be all the time. But in terms of length of articles, it's how much do you have to say about a given topic, right?
And that's one of the questions that Michelle had as well. It's like, what is consistent blogging? So is it okay to blog like every 2 months and then in a week and then, like,
Yeah.
should we make it at least
Um, yeah, here's what
predictable?
yeah, here's how I discuss that with people, and this is just my 2.5 cents, which is worth like a penny. But the way I explain this to people is I am a firm believer that if you're blogging correctly, it's like the example I gave earlier where one customer, if you equate out the time he's gotten like $180,000 worth of advertising for a couple of hours worth of work,
Mhm.
right? It's not every day I get paid $180,000 for a couple hours of my time. So to me, that sounds right. Like if you want to make more money, engage in the activities that pay you the most.
Mhm.
Blogging is one of the highest paying activities for the reasons I've mentioned. Blogging is one of the highest paying activities that you can engage in. So to the extent you have time to blog, you should be blogging frequently. Okay. If your data says you have something to write about and you have time, write about it. Um, at a minimum, I mean, I do think people need to get themselves on like a self-imposed schedule. Like, so for example, I'm going to post twice a week. I'm going to post once a week. I'm going to post X number of times a month or something like that. Put yourself on a schedule and stick with it. Because otherwise it's too easy to, you're sitting there next thing you know, you haven't posted anything in 3 years, right? Um, and I just tell people, think of it as a self-imposed schedule. We're all really good and I say this because this is really important to maintaining a blog. um, we're all really good at not following self-imposed deadlines and self-imposed requirements. Like the example I use is paying your taxes. None of us want to pay our taxes, but the government tells us we have to, and no matter how inconvenient it is, we find a way to do it, right? Um, so, uh, but if we put a requirement, so when other people put a requirement on us, we find a way to follow it. But when we put a requirement on ourselves, then we find a way to not follow it. So look at figure out a blogging schedule that's realistic and then just act as if someone else is requiring you to do it. Just like the government requires you to pay your taxes, right? I mean, that's
Right.
how I tell people to look at it.
Well, yeah, it creates that gives you the opportunity to have consistency. And if you have people who are following your blog, then they know when to expect that it to drop,
Mhm.
just like a podcast or something like that. That's why I have Friday forums they're not every Friday, but they're pretty much on Fridays at 11 o'clock California time because people know, and that's part of the reason I do it that way. So. Looks like, thank you, Mark. It looks like you've been answering a lot of questions. Let's address, Carmen, what's one other question? I know one that I see that I think we should address.
Yes. Can you address the concept of keywords?
I'm staying away from that one.
Uh,
Yes.
can I address they say
Concept,
cost?
the
Oh,
Concept.
concept.
concept, the
Yeah, I was like,
concept of
well,
keywords. Like,
the cost is nothing. Okay. I heard him wrong. I heard Carmen wrong. My apologies. Um, on one hand, I would say keywords matter, but they're not something to worry about. And I know that sounds contradictory. Um, and you know, uh, like when Mark shared his screen a minute ago and was showing things people are looking for on Search Console, that gives you an idea of the subjects people are looking at. And, I mean, I just always say follow those subjects and write on those subjects. And if you're writing about, I think it was ecology at Cornell.
Yeah, human
Um,
ecology, their
yeah,
program.
if you're writing on the subject of ecology classes at Cornell and you're writing about it well, the phrases that people are going to be looking for are just going to show up in there, right? Like in other words, you don't need to be sitting here thinking, I need to use this word on average 16.7 times every time I write an article. I mean, no, just just write naturally on a topic. And if you're writing about it well, those phrases are going to appear in, like if Mark sits down right now and writes an article on the ecology program at Cornell and ecology are going to show up in there a whole bunch of times. I mean, if he writes on this article, if he writes on this topic well. So as long as you're following the data in terms of subject matter, the keyword issue is going to take care of itself, you know, and don't focus so much on shoving phrases like into an article as much as writing a good article.
Luke's actually had me pull back. Like I was about to post an article, and when he looked it over, he was like, "Yeah, you're using the word aptitude test way too much." Because that's one of the things I write about a lot. And he was like, "Did you do that on purpose?" I was like, "Well, yeah, I want people to see it." And he's like, "Well, no, Google could even penalize you if you stuff a keyword in there too much." So, um, just have an agenda to educate people and write as naturally as you can, and then, I mean, it should be fine. My thing is, I worry about starting out. I worried about stuff like that way too much when I should have just been writing.
Hmm, that's good. What about AI? So Becky is asking about AI in blogging. What are your Luke, what are your thoughts?
I am way less worried about artificial intelligence than I am real world human stupidity and laziness when it comes to like blogging, to be honest. Um, the yeah, it's yeah, uh well, I know, I mean, I don't know, I remember like Siri and Google Assistant came out 12, 13 years ago, and that's the artificial intelligence that put us all out of business. And like about 10 years before that, Microsoft had Clippy, which was an artificial intelligence, and that was going to put every single secretary in the country out of work, and like, and everything else. Those of us that are engineers kind of chuckle about all the public hype. For all the public hype you hear about AI, you'll notice that none of the people you hear worrying about it are engineers. That's a whole separate thing. Um, but with all that said, it's so my primary point is it's not even something to worry about. But with all that said, what I would say about AI and blogging is uh all artificial intelligence, like if you were to use like ChatGPT or Bing or Bard or like any of these,
Claude.
um, yeah, all it's doing is basically scraping a bunch of information off the internet and re and uh meshing it together,
Hmm.
right? Um, it's not going to provide a lot of useful, in-depth, original thought information, right? So, like when Mark writes an article on Cornell, I'd have to go back and look at the article again. But I'm sure there's a lot of stuff in there where Mark is sharing his thoughts on if you are applying to Cornell, this, and this may be helpful, and this is why. And that's Mark thinking it through on his own and putting his own thought like into it. There is no original thought in AI writing. So
Also,
therefore
oops,
it's just sorry, but yeah, so therefore it's not going to be it's just not ever going to provide overall useful information. And a search engine's entire when you go to a search engine, you want useful information. Otherwise, you're going to quit using the search engine. All a search engine wants to do is give useful information. This is why Google has in their documentation that they are essentially I'm overstating this, but they're essentially going to disregard AI generated content.
Yeah, but how are they going to know it's AI generated?
Google is smart, and they,
Yeah, no,
yeah.
yeah, like trust me, they can look for patterns and tell is this AI written? It's all pattern driven. Is this AI written or
Hmm.
I
not?
had a
Yeah.
I had a student last year who I was helping with an essay to get into to college. And just there was just something a little weird about this kid's writing. Like I knew him, right? So I put it in Chat GPT 0, flagged it for AI, of course. It lit up green, and had a nice chat with him. So if me, an idiot from Arkansas, can spot it, I'm relatively certain Google can point all that stuff out. And also dovetailing from what Luke just said, like data and whatnot in this industry is important, but if you look at if anyone listening, when they think of converting a potential customer to like a paying customer, there's usually storytelling involved, right? Like you talk about
Yeah.
you
Yep.
talk about when you've done this with this student and if it worked or not, right? And that is so important when you blog, when you give your own examples from your own practice and how you've helped students, like that really, I mean, that winds them on a thread, right? And that's when you get people that are more interested. AI cannot do that right now, right? I mean, like maybe it can 5 years from now, but I mean, writers should write, not
Yeah.
yeah, not
Yeah.
a chatbot, at least not yet anyway.
Yeah. No, and and AI being able to uh AI being able to well, I would encourage, let me answer this, let's say this like this. I would encourage anyone to take a look at Mark's blog, and you'll see that when Mark writes an article, he's not writing just a quick list of something. Hey, 5 tips to get into Cornell, and then like, here's 5 tips, each with 3 sentences, and bam, like you're done. He's providing depth and substance to it.
I
And that
try.
is, yeah, that is not something AI is going to be able to do in anything resembling the foreseeable future. And and even for like a lot of the shorter form stuff, it's one of those things where even for shorter form stuff, like the articles might look fine 95% of the time. The other 5% is the problem. Yeah, which is why, yeah, AI won't be replacing blogging anytime soon.
Well, that's good news. I think that that brings us a measure of, comfort and having that originality and that authentic voice, which is what we're all looking for. So, in closing, there's a couple of resources we've mentioned the Google Analytics and the dashboard. There's a couple other places. Where would you recommend people go to learn more? And I'll put these in the show notes as well. And
Um, the ones I'd really suggest, and let me look at my notes here.
the
So the
Pro
ones,
Blogger book.
yeah, there's a
What
website
I was going to
called
say.
Yeah, there's a website called ProBlogger. That's a really good one to look at. It's a blog about how to blog.
He's got a
Uh,
podcast too.
yeah, and the guy who writes it has a podcast. He's got some books on there that he's written. The person who owns that blog, he's got some books on there uh, that I would strongly suggest reading. And this is somebody who's the guy who founded ProBlogger many years ago now. His name's Darren Rouse. He turned it into a 8-figure business. So,
Wow.
it's not something where it's Bob with his blog giving advice. It's someone that's it's worked. So I really suggest ProBlogger. Like as a really good resource.
It's short
Um,
too. It's short and it's good. There's no BS. I
yeah,
I found it really helpful.
yeah, no, that's a really good resource. Um, going online and watching some videos, whether they're from Google itself or from just tutorials on getting acquainted on a basic level with Google Search Console and Google Analytics. Um, I'd watch a few videos on, uh, you know, picking the blogging platform that's probably easiest for you to use based on your certain skill level. Um, and then the most important thing is I would start writing. Like it's real easy. It's real easy. Oh wow. Yeah, I've read all 12,000 posts on ProBlogger, and I've watched 19,000 hours of videos on YouTube, and I haven't written a blog post yet. Like, like get, get get enough information together so that you can get your first post out there, you can get your first post up on a blog where you own the domain and start tracking the data. That's all. Once you know how to get a post up and track the data on it, you're ready to start blogging. I mean, don't spend, the next like 11 years, like trying to educate yourself how to blog
And
without ever actually writing anything.
it's not sexy though, right? I mean, like it's the same thing over and over again,
Hmm.
right? Like there's nothing I'm not gonna look on the internet and find some way crazy secret tip that's going to change the way that I fundamentally blog. It's it's just I'm gonna open up Google Search Console, I'm gonna write an article, and then I'm gonna post it, and then next week I'm gonna do it again, hopefully, if
Yeah.
I'm disciplined.
Yeah. And just be mindful of kind of following up what Mark just said, just be mindful of everything we've talked about here is A, following the data means you're going to write about what other people, you're not going to write about what you want to write about. You're going to write about what other people want to read. That's part number one. Part number two, you're going to do it on a consistent schedule, whether you want to keep that schedule that week or not. Well, I just said you're going to do something you're not necessarily interested in at a time you don't necessarily want to do it at. That's a job. Most people don't want a job, which is why most people fail at this, right? So if you treat it like a job, like if you treat it like a job, you're going to do well at it.
Well, thank you very much. So we have certainly gotten words of wisdom and how to take blogging and treat it like a job. But it goes back to the very beginning of what you said, Mark, is that it brings you clients. And that is the number one thing that we're doing, and more above and beyond everything else. If that increases your and as you said, Luke, helps you make more money. Having that kind of job, give it to me. I'll take it, and I'll use it. So thank you both for being here. We really appreciate your time and appreciate everybody else that's been here today as well. Loved having all your questions. There have been tons of links and resources put in the chat. Thank you for everyone that's contributed to that. Carmen, thank you for making that happen as well. And these will all be put on the show notes so that you'll have access and have a lot of fun researching all of this. As a reminder, this Friday forums are going on a hiatus in May, and we'll be back sometime probably in June after the HECA conference. And don't forget to register for upcoming professional, professional development experiences. IECA's is coming in May. HECA's conference is in Atlanta, Georgia. That's in June. The Professional Development Institute is still taking registrations. We just cut the price almost $300. So go register. You can do the PDI, the Professional Development Institute, without doing the conference. Preferably you do both, but you can do one or the other or both. So if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to me. And again, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Luke. Thank you, Carmen. And thank you to everybody in my audience. Have a great weekend.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.